The American dream, a pillar of hope for generations, a promise whispered from parents to children etched into our nation's identity. But today that dream is under siege. A hidden crisis is unfolding, threatening our social fabric. It's the housing crisis impacting millions. Skyrocketing costs, stagnant wages, and a widening gap. It's time to act. The housing crisis in America is not a new phenomenon. Decades of policy decisions, market forces, and systemic inequalities have created a perfect storm of unaffordability. The seeds of this crisis were sown long ago, with deregulation and the erosion of affordable housing programs. Today, millions of Americans are burdened by housing costs, leaving little for essentials. The crisis is particularly acute for low-income families and people of color. It's a national crisis, impacting communities of all sizes and income levels. The human toll of the housing crisis is staggering. Behind the statistics are real people, families, seniors, and young adults struggling to make ends meet. The lack of affordable housing impacts every aspect of life, creating a cycle of despair. It's a crisis that demands our empathy, compassion, and urgent action. The housing crisis in America is inextricably linked to the widening gap between the rich and the poor. Decades of income inequality and discriminatory housing policies have commodified housing, prioritizing profits over people. The wealthy buy luxury homes, while millions struggle to afford basic housing. Corporate landlords drive up rents and displace residents. The commodification of housing fuels inequality and speculation. Addressing the crisis requires recognizing housing as a human right. To understand the housing crisis, we must journey back to post-2022 America. The American dream of homeownership was encouraged by government policies. However, deregulation and risky lending practices led to an unsustainable bubble. Speculation and easy credit fueled an artificial demand, driving prices up and creating a crisis. Deregulation led to risky lending practices, including subprime mortgages with adjustable rates, fueling a speculative frenzy. By the mid-2000s, the warning signs of a housing bubble were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Housing prices had reached unsustainable levels, far outpacing wage growth. As interest rates rose, millions of homeowners found themselves unable to make their monthly mortgage payments. The house of cards began to collapse. Defaults and foreclosures surged, sending shockwaves through the global financial system. Banks faced massive losses, leading to a credit crunch that paralyzed the economy. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 triggered a global financial crisis. The human toll was devastating. Millions lost their homes, their dreams shattered. Communities were ravaged by foreclosures, leaving behind blighted neighborhoods. The crisis exposed the fragility of a financial system built on speculation and greed. From foreclosures to Wall Street landlords, a new breed of speculator emerged. In the aftermath of the subprime mortgage crisis, as the housing market lay in ruins, Wall Street investment firms appeared from the wreckage. With deep pockets and an appetite for distressed assets, these firms swooped in, purchasing foreclosed homes and apartment buildings at bargain prices, often outbidding individual buyers and families seeking affordable housing. These institutional investors, driven by the pursuit of profit, transformed the housing market, shifting the balance of power away from individual homeowners and towards corporate landlords. They purchased properties not to provide affordable housing, but to generate returns for their investors. Rents were raised, often dramatically, to maximize profits, displacing long-term residents and exacerbating the affordability crisis. The rise of Wall Street landlords has had a profound impact on the housing market, contributing to rising rents, evictions, and a decline in homeownership rates. It has also led to a decrease in the availability of affordable housing, as institutional investors often prioritize higher rent units, neglecting the needs of low and moderate income families. The transformation of housing into a financial asset has created a system where profits are prioritized over people, fueling an affordability crisis that continues to grip the nation. The domino effect, how the housing bubble impacted the global economy. The subprime mortgage crisis, triggered by the bursting of the housing bubble, had a profound impact not only on the United States, but on the global economy as a whole. The interconnectedness of the global financial system meant that the crisis quickly spread beyond American borders, infecting financial institutions, businesses, and economies around the world. As the crisis deepened, credit markets froze, businesses struggled to secure loans, and consumer spending plummeted. The domino effect was swift and brutal, leading to a global recession, widespread job losses, and a sharp decline in economic activity. Governments around the world were forced to intervene, implementing massive bailout packages and stimulus measures to prevent a complete economic meltdown. The subprime mortgage crisis exposed the vulnerabilities of a highly leveraged and interconnected global financial system. It highlighted the dangers of deregulation, the risks of speculative bubbles, and the need for greater transparency and accountability in the financial industry. The crisis served as a stark reminder that economic shocks in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences, underscoring the importance of international cooperation and coordinated policy responses to address global economic challenges. The rent trap, a vicious cycle of rising costs and stagnant wages. Across America, a silent crisis traps millions in financial strain and housing insecurity. Skyrocketing rental costs and stagnant wages make it hard for families to afford housing. This crisis impacts communities nationwide, from urban centers to rural towns. Renters now spend over 50% of their income on housing, leaving little for essentials like food, healthcare, and education. Low-income renters face impossible choices. The rent trap is fueled by a shortage of affordable housing and rising property taxes. Landlords hold increasing power, raising rents with little regard for tenants.
The faces of the rent crisis, personal stories of struggle and resilience. Behind the statistics are real people with real stories of struggle and resilience.
Meet Sarah, a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Despite her efforts, she can barely afford the rent. Every month, she faces the agonizing decision of which bills to pay.
Then there's Michael, a retired teacher on a fixed income. He struggles to keep up with rising rents. He's cut back on expenses, but it's never enough. The fear of being priced out of his home weighs heavily on his mind.
And then there's Maria, a young professional in the service industry. Despite a steady job, she can't afford her own place. She's forced to live with roommates, sacrificing her privacy. The dream of owning a home now feels like a distant fantasy.
The crushing weight of rent burden. When housing costs consume a life. When rent consumes a disproportionate share of a person's income, it creates a ripple effect that impacts every aspect of their life. It's a crushing weight that limits opportunities, stifles aspirations, and erodes the quality of life.
Imagine living with the constant stress of knowing that one unexpected expense, one medical emergency, or one job loss could send you spiraling into a financial abyss. For many renters, this is their daily reality. They live paycheck to paycheck, constantly juggling bills and making difficult choices just to keep a roof over their heads.
They may be forced to forego basic necessities, like healthy food, healthcare, and transportation, just to make ends meet. They may have to work multiple jobs, sacrificing time with their families and jeopardizing their physical and mental health.
The mental toll of living with this level of financial insecurity can be devastating. It can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and a sense of hopelessness. It can strain relationships, erode self-esteem, and diminish the quality of life for individuals, families, and entire communities. The ripple effects of unaffordable rent impact on families, communities, and the economy. The rent crisis is not just a personal tragedy for those struggling to afford housing. It's a societal crisis with far-reaching consequences. When families are burdened by unaffordable rent, it impacts their children's well-being, their ability to save for the future, and their overall quality of life. Children living in rent-burdened households may face challenges in school, as the stress of their family's financial situation takes a toll on their ability to learn and thrive. Moreover, when a significant portion of a community is struggling to afford rent, it can lead to a decline in neighborhood conditions as landlords cut corners on maintenance and repairs. This can create a cycle of decline as businesses close, crime rates rise, and residents with more resources flee to more affluent areas. The result is a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, further exacerbating existing inequalities. The economic consequences of the rent crisis are also significant. When a large segment of the population is burdened by high housing costs, it can stifle economic growth, as consumers have less disposable income to spend. This can lead to job losses, business closures, and a decline in overall economic activity. A nation divided, the growing gap between renters and homeowners. The rent crisis is widening the gap between renters and homeowners, creating a two-tiered society where those who own their homes enjoy security and wealth-building opportunities, while those who rent are often trapped in a cycle of financial instability and housing insecurity. This divide has implications for everything from wealth accumulation to political power, further entrenching existing inequalities. Homeownership has long been considered a cornerstone of the American dream, a path to building wealth and achieving financial security. However, as home prices continue to soar out of reach for many, renting has become the only option for a growing segment of the population. This shift has profound implications for wealth inequality, as renters miss out on the opportunity to build equity in their homes, a key driver of wealth accumulation for the middle class. Moreover, the growing divide between renters and homeowners has political ramifications, as homeowners often wield more political influence due to their stake in the housing market. This can lead to policies that favor homeowners over renters, further exacerbating the challenges faced by those struggling to afford housing. From shadows to streets, the visible face of a hidden crisis. The housing crisis in America has a face. It's the face of homelessness, a stark reminder of our nation's failure to address the growing affordability gap. From sprawling encampments to solitary figures under freeway overpasses, homelessness is a visible crisis. It's easy to dismiss homelessness as individual failings, but the reality is far more complex and systemic. The rise of homelessness is directly linked to the escalating housing crisis. As rents skyrocket and wages stagnate, more Americans are priced out of the housing market. The unraveling, how the housing crisis pushes people into homelessness. The path to homelessness is rarely linear. It's often a slow and agonizing unraveling, a series of unfortunate events and missed opportunities that converge to create a perfect storm of despair. For many, it begins with a job loss, a reduction in hours, or an unexpected medical bill, any of which can throw a delicately balanced budget into disarray. As savings dwindle and bills pile up, the threat of eviction looms large, a constant source of stress and anxiety.
For families with children, the pressure is even more intense. parents are forced to make impossible choices between paying rent and putting food on the table, between keeping the lights on and providing their children with basic necessities. The emotional toll on both parents and children can be devastating, leading to feelings of shame, hopelessness, and despair. As the housing crisis intensifies, the safety net designed to catch those in need is fraying at the edges. Shelters are overwhelmed, waiting lists are long, and affordable housing options are scarce. The result is a growing number of people forced to sleep in their cars, in tents, or on the streets, exposed to the elements, vulnerable to crime and violence, and stripped of their dignity.
Beyond misconceptions. The diverse faces of homelessness. Homelessness is not a monolith, it's a complex issue with many faces, each with a unique story to tell. The stereotypical image of a homeless person as a disheveled individual struggling with addiction or mental illness is a gross oversimplification of a multifaceted problem. While these challenges can contribute to homelessness, they do not define it.
The truth is that homelessness can affect anyone, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic background. It's a crisis that touches every corner of society, from veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life, to families displaced by natural disasters, from individuals with disabilities facing a lack of affordable housing options, to young people aging out of the foster care system with nowhere to go.
The housing crisis is a driving force behind the increasing diversity of the homeless population. As rents continue to rise and affordable housing options dwindle, more and more working families, seniors living on fixed incomes, and individuals with disabilities are finding themselves priced out of their homes and forced into homelessness. This trend underscores the urgent need for comprehensive solutions that address the root causes of homelessness, from a lack of affordable housing to inadequate support services for those most in need. A system that fails. The cycle of poverty and housing instability. The housing crisis traps families in a cycle of instability and despair. Lack of affordable housing makes it hard to maintain employment or access essential services. Homelessness can lead to job loss and eviction records, perpetuating poverty. A comprehensive approach is needed to break this cycle. The human cost stories from the front lines of a national crisis. Behind the statistics are real people with real stories of loss, resilience, and the human cost of a broken system.
Meet Jennifer, a single mother who lost her job and home, now living in her car with her children.
Then there's David, a veteran struggling with PTSD and homelessness.
And Maria, a senior citizen priced out of her apartment, now living on the streets.
These stories highlight the human toll of the housing crisis. Wall Street's shadow looms, the rise of corporate landlords. After the 2008 housing crash, corporate landlords emerged, buying foreclosed homes at bargain prices. These firms prioritize profits over people, driven by algorithms and shareholder demands. Housing is now seen as a commodity, not a basic human need. This shift has changed the rental market, tilting power towards landlords. The rise of corporate landlords raises concerns about affordability and tenant rights. Profit over people. How investment firms are reshaping the housing market. Corporate landlords prioritize profit, often at the expense of tenant well-being. They use data to raise rents and cut costs, neglecting maintenance and tenant services. This leads to deteriorating living conditions and a sense of alienation among tenants. Tenants are treated as commodities, secondary to investors' financial interests. The commodification of housing turning homes into financial instruments. Homes are increasingly viewed as financial instruments, assets to be bought, sold, and leveraged for profit. This shift is fueled by Wall Street money, as investment firms capitalize on rental housing demand. The commodification of housing has far-reaching consequences, contributing to the affordability crisis. It erodes the social fabric of communities, making neighborhoods less about shared spaces and more about profit. Eviction Nation, the human cost of corporate greed. The pursuit of profit over people has real-world consequences, and nowhere are those consequences more evident than in the rising tide of evictions sweeping across the nation.
Corporate landlords, with their focus on maximizing returns, are often quick to evict tenants who fall behind on rent, even for minor infractions or temporary setbacks. These evictions, often carried out with ruthless efficiency, leave families and individuals displaced, traumatized, and facing an uncertain future.
The eviction process itself can be dehumanizing and traumatic, particularly for families with children. The loss of a home can have a devastating impact on children's emotional well-being, their education, and their long-term life outcomes. It can also lead to a downward spiral of poverty and instability, as families struggle to find new housing, often ending up in overcrowded or substandard living conditions.
The rise in evictions is not simply a byproduct of a tight housing market. It's a deliberate strategy employed by some corporate landlords to maximize profits. By cycling through tenants, they can justify rent increases, often pushing out long-term residents who are paying below market rates. This practice, known as rent evictions, displaces families and destabilizes communities, all in the name of profit.
A system rigged against renters, the power imbalance, fueling the crisis. At the heart of the rental crisis lies a fundamental power imbalance between landlords and tenants.
In many cities across the country, landlords hold a disproportionate amount of power, able to dictate the terms of lease agreements, raise rents with impunity, and evict tenants with relative ease. This power imbalance is exacerbated by a lack of affordable housing options, forcing renters to accept unfavorable terms or risk homelessness.
This power dynamic is further tilted in favor of corporate landlords, who have the resources to hire sophisticated legal teams, lobby for favorable legislation, and outmaneuver tenants in court. They often include clauses in their lease agreements that limit tenant rights, such as waiving the right to a jury trial or agreeing to binding arbitration.
These tactics make it incredibly difficult for tenants to challenge unfair rent increases, fight evictions, or hold landlords accountable for unsafe living conditions. The current system often leaves renters feeling powerless and vulnerable, trapped in a cycle of exploitation and instability.
Addressing this power imbalance is crucial to creating a more just and equitable housing market. This requires strengthening tenant protections, expanding legal aid services, and empowering renters to advocate for their rights. Solutions for a more equitable housing future. The housing crisis in America is complex but not insurmountable. Amidst struggle, there are seeds of hope and innovation. Communities are demanding affordable housing as a right. From grassroots organizing to policy reforms, solutions are emerging. Housing is a fundamental human right, not a commodity. Reclaiming affordability, expanding access to affordable housing options. The housing crisis demands more affordable options for low and moderate income families. Decades of underfunding and loss of units have worsened the shortage. A multi-pronged approach is essential. Public investment and innovative financing are key. Inclusionary zoning and preserving existing units are promising strategies. Investing in older buildings and rental assistance helps maintain affordability. Alternative models like tiny homes and co-living spaces offer new solutions. Empowering renters, strengthening tenant rights and protections. The power imbalance between landlords and tenants is a major contributing factor to the housing crisis. In many parts of the country, landlords hold a disproportionate amount of power, able to raise rents, evict tenants, and neglect maintenance with relative impunity. This power dynamic leaves renters vulnerable to exploitation, displacement, and substandard living conditions.
Strengthening tenant rights and protections is essential to creating a more equitable and just housing market. This includes enacting or strengthening just cause eviction laws, which limit the circumstances under which landlords can evict tenants, providing tenants with greater security and stability.
It also involves expanding access to legal aid and tenant counseling services, empowering renters to understand their rights, navigate complex legal processes, and hold landlords accountable for violations.
Furthermore, promoting tenant organizing and collective bargaining can help shift the balance of power in the rental market. By forming tenant unions or associations, renters can collectively negotiate with landlords for better living conditions, fairer lease terms, and greater influence over decisions that affect their homes and communities. Empowering renters to advocate for themselves is crucial to creating a more equitable and just housing system. GAP 7S, Building a More Just System, Rethinking Housing Policy and Priorities. Addressing the housing crisis demands a fundamental rethinking of housing policy and priorities. Housing should be a fundamental human right, not a commodity.
Policies must prioritize renters and low-income families over investors. Housing is a public good, essential to well-being and prosperity. The urgency of now a crisis that demands action. The American dream is fading. The promise of a good life feels increasingly out of reach for millions. The housing crisis is here, now, and demands our immediate attention. Millions are burdened by housing costs, making impossible choices. The consequences are dire, leading to increased poverty and homelessness. The time for complacency is over. We must act now. A shared humanity, the moral imperative to act. The housing crisis is a moral crisis. It reflects our failure to uphold fairness, justice, and dignity. Safe, affordable housing is a basic human right. Every person deserves a place to call home. A home is the foundation of our lives. We cannot ignore this crisis. Addressing it is a moral imperative. Reclaiming the dream, forging a path toward housing justice. The housing crisis is rooted in systemic inequalities and profit over people. But amidst the challenges, there is hope. Communities are demanding change and forging a just housing future. From grassroots organizing to policy reforms, solutions are emerging. The time for action is now. Let us rise to the challenge and Hey everyone! If you enjoy our content and want to support Can Do Global Files, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us grow and bring you more amazing stories from around the world. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. It really makes a difference. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Can Do Global Files, documenting the world.